And Mr. Jennis, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My questions will be for Mr. de Pulford. I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground. I know you could probably talk for 6 minutes on each of these, but just maybe in 45 seconds or less. Why does IPAC matter? Why is IPAC important? Why is it a target for the PRC?
The PRC doesn't like dissent abroad. It doesn't like people challenging its consensus. I tend to believe that where governments find themselves, that because of economic dependency or because so many are rather diplomatically cowed by the assertiveness of the People's Republic of China, governments are less willing to speak out than parliamentarians can. IPAC creates a space for parliamentarians to speak out and to try to defend the rules-based order, which is under pressure from China. That's why it matters, and that's why China doesn't like it.
Do you have reason to believe beyond this particular attack that IPAC is particularly in the sights of the CCP? Are there other data points that lead you to see this particular targeting?
Yes, this is at least the second breach that we have suffered. Before we went to Taipei recently for our annual summit, somehow the People's Republic of China obtained our delegates list and targeted members in at least 9 countries to try to prevent them from coming. This involved them phoning up in a very undiplomatic way legislators in Colombia, in North Macedonia, in Slovenia, in various countries to try to tempt them to go to China instead of Taiwan, or to tell them that they might face consequences if they did come. Unfortunately, IPAC has been in the sights of the PRC for some years, but it seems to be getting more severe, not less.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's also a compliment to your important work. How could APT 31 have accessed IPAC's email list, in particular my personal email, and your delegates list, as you just referred to?
Thank you. I think that's a very important question. The reason that we have high confidence that they obtained our distribution list is that the list of hits that came back from the FBI included exactly the same personal email addresses that we used to contact various MPs. So for most of the other email addresses on that list were just parliamentary email addresses which are public domain. But the very ones that we used to contact people on personal addresses, which, as you know, Mr. Jennis, included yours, sometimes Gmail addresses or Proton mail addresses, they were exactly the ones that the attackers had also used. So I do not know how they obtained that, but I do have one possible theory. Unfortunately, somebody who used to volunteer for us, a man named Andy Lee, was arrested in China under the national security law. He is in prison in Hong Kong, and he awaits sentencing for national security law crimes, some of which are associated with IPAC. We know that they breached his system, and they may have got our distribution list from him. Very disturbingly, when he was apprehended, he was taken to Shenzhen prison in China and reportedly tortured. This is something the UN rapporteur on torture has actually raised formally, so this isn't just idle speculation. So very unfortunately, in fact, very tragically, we believe that might have been the way they obtained our list.
Thank you, and I think all committee members would join me in deploring the torture and the treatment of Mr. Andy Lai. I know that this is very personal for members of IPAC who have worked with him, and so I think it's important that is on the record. Mr. de Pulford, some of the counter we've heard from the government is that, it's really complicated to inform members of parliament. There's lots of different kinds of cyber attacks, and they've tried to kind of bury this in apparent complexity when to me it's very simple. If a person is targeted, the FBI tells you they're being targeted, you would just pass along that information. There are a number of countries that did inform their members of parliament just to kind of break through the false claims of complexity here. What happened in those countries? What went well in terms of the process of informing members of parliament, and what can we learn from that?
Thank you for the question. In my opinion, unless there is a very good intelligence reason not to inform parliamentarians, I can't see a good reason why elected representatives wouldn't be told that they've been targeted in a progressive cyber attack. They don't have the ability to defend themselves in such circumstances or to raise their security game. That would be my fundamental answer. To your point about the other countries, well, I know that in Switzerland and Lithuania, parliamentarians were warned. In fact, they were possibly even warned before the FBI had done their foreign dissemination requests, which is the mechanism through which they tell other countries stuff that they might want to tell their own parliamentarians, because obviously the FBI can't contact you directly. That'd be a violation of diplomatic norms. But in those countries, in Switzerland and in Lithuania, they briefed their MPs because they knew they'd been attacked. So clearly they didn't see a big intelligence problem with telling them. They wanted them to be able to protect themselves and to know that they were a target.
Yeah, so I'm almost done. So just two quick final questions. In those cases, do you know who told them? Was it their parliaments? Was it their security agencies? If that'd be worth knowing. And then just in terms of the, well, why don't you answer that one first, and then I'll ask my last question here if there's time.
My understanding is that they were briefed by both. And very often in different countries, parliamentary security and various intelligence services operate in lockstep anyway. So
okay. And then just the last question I wanted to ask is you mentioned the sovereignty concerns
Rappel au
around the
règlement,
FBI.
Monsieur le Président.
Point of order. I think the subject is so important, we have to perhaps slow down a little bit. It might take a little more time, but I missed quite a few elements there that might be important.
Probably heard that in the translation. There's just been a request if you could just slow down the pace a little bit so that the translators can keep up. I'm going to, my clock shows 10 seconds, but I'm just going to call it 30, okay? And please just do your best to slow down. Thank you.
I understand that the FBI has this protocol around not wanting to inform us directly. They want to go through our national governments and respect sovereignty. But we live in a democracy where Parliament is supreme. If Parliament were to ask an allied intelligence agency like the FBI to inform members of Parliament directly of threats that they identified, do you think that would be a reasonable safety valve so that members of Parliament, including members of the opposition, aren't beholden to decisions of the executive to constrain our ability to access information that's important to our safety?
Honestly, Mr. Jennings, I think that's a bit above my pay grade in the realms of diplomacy. Certainly, the FBI and the information they gave us was exceptionally useful, and we're very grateful to them for it.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Jennings. Mr. Duguid, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for painting a stark and concerning picture of the cyber security threats that our nation and other nations face, and that threat is increasing. One of the things that concerned me most was that our private devices were being targeted. We do have protections for our parliamentary systems, our parliamentary emails, and some of the resources that we have access to as parliamentarians. But as I'm a politician, I'm a parliamentarian, and there's lots of interplay. Sometimes the area is gray between the political and the parliamentary, as you know. And I'm wondering how you learn about attacks on private devices and how we can better protect ourselves as parliamentarians. And is there a gold standard out there somewhere? Is there a nation that we could eliminate? Mr. Juno Katsuya mentioned that we may be in the latter half of the pile with respect to G7 countries. So is there a nation on Earth with the best training, the best cybersecurity hygiene that we could emulate? And I'll open that up to any one of our speakers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, there is definitely more effort performed by our Five Eyes allies when it comes to warn, to train, to raise the awareness. In security, the human factor is always the weakest link. And contrary to maybe the academic comfort that Mr. Ward has put into the technology, it's not enough. Just take the example, for example, a very benign example, but just this week came in the newspaper a city councillor in Gatineau who went to Russia with his equipment and without even thinking that he could be compromised or something like this. This is like naive to borderline stupid. In that perspective, this is the human being the weak element. It's not the technology. We have phenomenal technology. CSE does a fantastic job. It's supported also by the private sector like Bell Canada and other group that cooperate to try to protect us. But at the end of the day, common sense needs to be injected as well. And in that perspective, from an operational point of view, we need to be capable to warn more and to train more. Continuous training, not only one training you get when you get sworn in and when you arrive as a new member of parliament, and then we forget about you for the next 5 years. No, we need to constantly repeat this, and particularly with the staff. It was mentioned during the Hawk Commission that 11 candidates and 13 staff members were on the payroll of the Chinese consulate in Toronto. So you can see that not only the parliamentary members will be targeted, but their staff as well.
Mr. Schull, a chance, because you weren't able to speak earlier. Mr. Schull.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. And I'd just like to say, the fact that Mr. Genus's personal email was compromised is horrible, and it's because of his job as a parliamentarian. So I thought I could offer some concrete advice to this committee that I hope is helpful. The first is allocate a parliamentary budget for personal cybersecurity protection. And I'll tell you how I protect myself, and I bet you that I'm probably better positioned than everyone in this room, and I'm just some guy. I'm not in the public eye, and I'm not being targeted the same way you are. I use an encrypted multi-hop VPN for my data. I use biometric and cryptographically locked password managers, and each of my passwords is over 20 characters long, and it reads like gobbledygook. So if you tried to brute force my passwords, you'd have to really, really want to. I use the most sophisticated malware protection on a commercial market, and I use a hardware multi-factor authentication for my most sensitive accounts. So if you want to hack me, it'll require a state-level actor who really wants to get in. And then, for my most sensitive stuff, you're going to have to get the keys out of my pocket. All of that, we're talking hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars. And so let's allocate some budget for that, and let's make sure that members of parliament can be part of their own defense. Because if they're going after your personal accounts, it's not because of your personality; it's because of your day job.
Anyone else? Maybe Mr. Ward, I mean, just in my mind, we should all have a cybersecurity audit and to point out the weak points and how we can shore them up.
Just to give a quick statistic, a few years ago I participated to a research that was done by TELUS. They interviewed 600 Canadian companies to try to find out within companies where was the weak link. And they found that the greatest numbers of security breach were done by the executive.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duguid. Mr. Schull, you can have my phone for an hour at the end of the meeting. Madame Gaudreau, la parole à vous.
Bon, Monsieur le Président.
Well, thank you, Chair. Can I add that back the 3 minutes? What? Just kidding. Well, first thing I'd like to hear about are what are the consequences? What's going to happen to us in Quebec, in Canada? We travel. What would be your recommendations? We go to Taiwan, we go to abroad. So what are your recommendations? And what are the consequences? Well, there's a lot of models, but they're not infallible. What's missing currently is more cooperation and collaboration between parliamentarians and those who are responsible for security, state security as well. The idea that you're not even allowed to be informed of something that you were under attack, for example, this is ridiculous. C-70 will change that, I hope, and we'll see how that evolves. But prevention, prevention, prevention. The equipment cannot do it all. There's no magic telephone or device. We have to develop a culture of this. I'm not talking about spyware and all James Bond and all that. We have to develop a certain reflex. If you have a breach, it allows a lot of other people to be breached. TikTok, why is it so problematic? Because if somebody takes a look at the terms and conditions, you're giving access of your phone, to your contact list, to the cameras, to the pictures, to the microphone, and it can be activated remotely. So this becomes an electronic eavesdropping device. So let's assume a young teen going to college or something. Well, perhaps I also have the number of my uncle who works for National Defense or a strategic supplier of sensitive goods. And we have just given access to an offensive. Well, if people are listening in on me, nobody, it's not that bad if they have my contacts. But what would be the consequences for the individual and the parliamentarian who is here? That's not a consequence. Well, we lose the confidence of our allies, first of all. We lose our reputation internationally. Canada's not a serious player. Look at what's happening. So there's a whole sector of our population which is vulnerable, ill protected. There are millions of zombie computers. What is a zombie? It's one that has been infected and is used to be part of a distribution. So we are very poorly educated and aware. We don't invest sufficiently. We're at the bottom of the list for the G7, and we just do not do enough to protect our parliamentarians. And as I say, as soon as there's a hole in the dike, anybody can get through. Foreign intervention must be made to stop it. Okay, I have further questions. I heard Mr. Ketsia say that cyber attacks is a weapon of choice. I have young adolescents at home, and are you aware that cyber attack is the weapon of choice? And how did that come about?
Through you, Chair, I'll say that the cyber weapon is a very formidable one, and it is directed down various vectors, as the professionals often refer to it. How did it become so formidable? I think there are really two answers to that. One is a general answer. It's the nature of the digital lives that we all lead, which creates great openings and vulnerabilities, particularly for sophisticated foreign state actors to try and gain access to our data for all kinds of manipulative purposes. The other, of course, and here this is a very significant threat, the other way in which cyber has become so significant is that it has given an entirely new kind of tool for foreign states to conduct espionage operations against adversaries or countries of interest. And the foreign espionage aspect of cyber capabilities is one that I think that we perhaps do not pay enough attention to in the context of all the discussions we've had about foreign interference. Thank you.
Il me reste peu de temps, mais ce que je...
I have a little bit of time left, but if I understood you correctly, what you're trying to advise the population is that it's not just another product, and they really have to be careful. Now, I'd really like more time, but that's it for now. Well, Madame Goudreau. Madame Matheson.
Thank you to the witnesses for appearing today. I certainly want to say how serious we absolutely need to take this. You've made this very, very clear. I know that we all do. In past conversations with our own security personnel and people in charge of this, they, I think, and from what I took from it, they were saying we didn't inform at the same rate. Eventually we did, but we didn't inform because this was something that was stopped, that it didn't get through the net. And the idea that there are so many attacks, if we were to let you know about all of them, that's all that we would do. What are your comments, I guess, on that per se, or what can we do to, I don't know, do we have to change that mentality? Do we just say, let us know about all of them? Could you comment on that a little bit?
The area which will be targeted will be the people of strategic importance. Parliamentarians are definitely people of strategic importance. Critical infrastructures are definitely of strategic importance. There is a technical term, very easy that everybody knows, that called they ping. Every day they try. So they ping. They knock at the door, see if the door is open. They try the handle. That we don't need necessarily to know because, yes, indeed, there is hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of attacks every day. So in that perspective, we cannot sort. But when somebody is particularly targeted repeatedly because of what they do in their work, what they promote, what they challenge, or what they denounce, like transnational oppression and stuff like that, they should be warned. They should receive a better attention. They should be receiving also training to a certain extent. Like I said, to develop a new business culture, a new way of being aware. Because awareness is the only true defense that we have. Technical can do so much only.
Did you want me to come in on it? So,
Sure.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, in preparation for this, I went through all the other witnesses' testimony, and if I was to offer advice to remedy what I saw in the previous evidence, I'd offer you 3 pieces of advice. The first is get your information sharing house in order. Like, it was one of those kind of things where everyone didn't really know who was sharing what with whom, when, and why. And there was a recognition that was a problem. And as my colleague, Mr. Wark, has indicated, the MOU has been updated. So if you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to take a hard look at that and just make sure that it's tight and that we know. Because also treat this like a dress rehearsal. Like, this is going to happen again and again and again. And so just make sure you know who's on first with respect to the sharing of information and what happens and what that threshold is. Number 2, as I'd already indicated, some personal money to protect yourselves. And while the evidence indicated that the threat was stopped, we don't know about. And sorry, Mr. Genus, we don't know about his personal account because that wouldn't have fallen within the IT department of Parliament. And then the third is training, but not just cyber training, like general awareness, so that you can be your own best partner in your defense.
In terms of actually, both of you, Mr. Schull and Mr. Wark, you've come before Defense Committee before, where we've had conversations, and so it's good to see you at another committee. But we had important conversations about how social media giants are being weaponized against Canadians as well. Seeing social media bots taking over, of course, algorithms that are written specifically in terms of how they are encouraged to make as much money as possible, publication or advertisements that are surrounding those algorithms, driving Canadians potentially down a specific path, and an ignorance of that or a denial of that by social media giants. What do you think government needs to do in order to manage that in maybe a different way than we have before?
Ms. Matheson, that's a very difficult question. And I guess my first response is that I'm not sure governments have the primary responsibility in this regard. I think it's up to all Canadians to be educated about the nature of these kinds of threats and to exercise good judgment to the extent possible. Regulating social media companies, particularly foreign giants, is a complex task. I think there are things that can be asked of social media platforms in terms of their own self-monitoring of malicious information and making more transparent the nature of their business enterprise so that we all understand what we're being subjected to would be helpful. Generally, the approach, it's not consistent around the world, but generally the approach has been so far to try and work in partnership with social media companies. Perhaps we'll find that that's not going to work entirely satisfactorily, but it's going to be a difficult business because they are giants.
There's a counter discourse that needs to be developed from the government.
Sorry, Mr. Junot-Ketsu, just very, very quickly.
I agree. I totally agree that the social media are going to be weaponized. They are currently weaponized, and with the arrival of artificial intelligence, this is going to go even worse. So there's something we should know.
Okay, merci.
Sorry, can he finish his sentence just because of that
Yeah,
disruption?
he can. Yeah,
Would that be
go
all right?
ahead.
So
Sorry
we
about that.
definitely need to pay attention. When it comes to cybersecurity and the element of the parliamentary, what is currently happening is that there's a lot of radicalization that are taking place because some foreign countries are using the social media to sort of influence certain groups. And the polarization that are taking place turns into our street, where we have MPs being aggressed by assaulted by people, and that is happening in the cyberspace as well. So that's the reason why we need to pay attention and to develop a stronger discourse, a counter discourse to what's currently happening.
Okay, merci. Thank you very much. Mr. de Pulford, I just wanted to note, I know you've raised your hand a few times. The rules stipulate that, unfortunately, unless recognized by a member, I can't cede the floor to you. So I just wanted to provide that clarification. Perhaps that's okay. Yeah, perhaps in the line of questioning to come, you'll be called upon. But I just wanted to offer that clarification. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To Mr. de Pulford, you noted that 2 politicians were successfully compromised. For clarification, was this part of the same APT-31 progressive reconnaissance attack?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Cooper. We do not know because we don't have the evidence of that. I put that question directly to the FBI, and this is what they said. We have no data showing whether the APT group took any additional targeting actions after sending the initial tracking link emails. But based on our cumulative knowledge, it would be assumed there would have been follow-on efforts by the cyber actors to target those accounts. So we don't have the evidence of it, but I'll give you the timeline. They were successfully compromised 2 months after the progressive attack had begun, the Pixel reconnaissance attack in January 2021.
You for that, and you had also indicated in your testimony that the position that the government of Canada, for instance, has taken, which is to say that, well, these 18 parliamentarians weren't informed, but to some degree it's not really that big of a deal because the attack was successfully thwarted. You stated that that position is, if I heard you correctly, at best questionable and at worst misleading. Can you perhaps expand upon that?
Yes, absolutely. And I would like to say very quickly, people from all parties in Canada were attacked in this attack. The attackers didn't care which parties they were from. But I do not believe it is correct to say that the attack was unsuccessful. In fact, we've already heard actually from one of the other witnesses today that because they do not know what happened with Mr. Jennis's personal account, they could not assure that the attack was unsuccessful. It is simply not possible to say that. Not only that, technically speaking, it's very difficult to assure that anyway, for the following reasons. Many parliamentarians were told around the world these were unsuccessful low-level attacks like marketing emails. That in itself is not incorrect. Pixel embedding, pixel tracking is very, very common. However, in the hands of a state-sponsored hacking group like APT-31, they're very different. I would say very briefly, I know I don't have much time, what they can do with that is triangulate where that person is from. They could find a vulnerable router, easily hack that on the basis of the information they can gather from Pixel reconnaissance emails, and much worse. We have a member whose emails were compromised and whose emails were given to a political opponent for compromat. So this is really rather serious, and it ought not to be described as a low-level unsuccessful attack.
Thank you for that. Mr. Juno Katsuya, the government put in place a ministerial directive in May of 2023. However, the 18 parliamentarians were kept in the dark about this attack all the way through. It was only thanks to IPAC that they became aware of it. I would note that following the issuance of the ministerial directive in May of 2023, in August of 2023, 24 government agencies and departments received a briefing about this attack, including the Prime Minister's Department, the PCO. So, what good is a ministerial directive if there is no follow-through? And I would welcome any comments you have about the ministerial directive that was issued in May of 2023, and perhaps what, if anything, could be improved upon with respect to that directive.
Very little good. Very little good. If you do not share information, if you do not share about what's going on, if you sort of don't learn from the experience of others, you're not going to get ahead of your time and ahead of the bad guys. The bad guys will always win. So we need to be capable to have a little bit more transparency. We need to have also have accountability. That's one of the things that is lacking. A lot of people will, including the private sector, will try to sort of hide as much as possible. Back in 2010, there was a successful attack into the Treasury Board of Canada that went through a law firm in Toronto. They went through the private sector to enter the Canadian. To this day, we're not capable to assess if we have been capable to clean the entire Treasury Board system. And the Treasury Board has been shut down for 3 weeks in that period of time. Outside communication. So this is important. This is really important to sort of work in cooperation, in sharing information, in sharing experiences in order to be capable to defend ourselves.
You would agree it's a failure. The 24 government agencies,
Mr. Cooper,
including the Prime Minister's
very
Department,
quickly,
were
please.
briefed, but these members of Parliament were left in the dark following the issuance of that directive.
Mr. President, I didn't hear what you said.
Mr. Cooper, we are over time. I will give you the opportunity to repeat the question very quickly, please, and a brief response from Mr. Juno Katsuya.
We are learning. We are learning. Everybody is learning. There's definitely, in my experience, my 40 years of experience in the intelligence world, that what I've seen in the government is constantly attempt to sort of hide as much as possible those quote-unquote failure. But that's not the right way to do it. That's not the right way. We need to be capable to sort of share and to learn from one another so we can get stronger and better at our job.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Romanado for 5 minutes.
The witnesses for being here today. So I want to pick up on something that Mr. Juno Katsuya, you mentioned that in just a previous example of an incident that happened with the Treasury Board in 2010, that it was through a law firm. So, and Mr. Schull, you also mentioned about there's the physical tools that we can use. There's also the training of personal responsibility and being careful on how we do the business that we do in training that's required. But in this case of Act 31, we heard from the previous witness that it was through their organization that the email distribution list or email addresses were accessed. In the case in 2010, it was through a law firm. So in terms of, there's educating parliamentarians in terms of us making sure that we're careful on what we're doing and we're using every tool in the toolkit, as Mr. Schull said, and I would love to show him my phone as well after, to secure. So there's the behavior and then there's the tools as well. But what would you advise organizations that we're involved with? So for instance, many of us, we give our email addresses out when we're talking with people who want to meet with us, organizations, so on. So they're creating distribution lists as well that we have no control over. We are public officials. We are public, so we share our information so that people can be in touch with us. So how can we make sure if a third party has our these distribution lists, that they're also being mindful of the fact that they are susceptible, especially if they're working with a lot of parliamentarians, to keep our information safe? What would you recommend to them as well?
to control and to be capable to raise the awareness with a third party is a very, very difficult task because you don't necessarily have the control on what they do, how they do it, and who they train and stuff like that. Again, it returns to general public awareness that should sort of be informed. But there's an element as well that should be taken when sometimes you don't have control. As you pointed out, your email address is publicly known, and people might take it and simply use it for their own purpose, and it's only at the end you're going to see that, oh, they use my address. But when you do business with people, you should be able to ask them certain standards. And the Canadian government should be capable to impose those standards as well. Just like public work impose certain standards when you do contract with the government, somewhere, somehow, there's this kind of new business culture that I'm talking about. Still need to be defined in its details, but somewhere, somehow, there's a general awareness that needs, and education that needs to sort of start to percolate more to the general public.
Okay, and Mr. Schull, I'll give you a few seconds to answer, but I do also want to get back to Mr. de Pulford because he wanted to provide us some additional recommendations, and I don't think he had a chance to do so. Mr. Schull, do you have anything to add to that?
Just say in answer to your question, if I understood it correctly through you, Mr. Chair, was about email addresses, and I'm like, you don't need to hack a database to get your email address. I get it off the internet. So there's really three questions that are germane to this committee's work. Number one is, when does CSC notify your IT department, and what do they do as a consequence of that notification? Number two, when do notifications go to members themselves, and under what circumstances, and who is indeed the lead? Is it CSIS? Is it CSE? Is it your IT department? And that's what landed us in this discussion today. And number three, what do you do as an individual member of Parliament when you leave here and pick up your personal device? Because your day job, while it might stop for the day, threat actors are still looking at you as a person.
Thank you. And Mr. de Pulford, you wanted to also add some additional recommendations. I think you only had two of them for us, but if you'd like to add to that.
And in about 45 seconds, sir. We're running over time. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. There need to be more resources for parliamentary security. This is a David versus a Goliath fight, unfortunately, and that's the case not just in Canada, but really across the world. There needs to be threat modelling for every MP and staff. Very important that staff are also exposed to, because of who they work for, and very often an easy way in to a member of Parliament. Staff need to be included in training processes. In some places, mystery shopper phishing has been done by parliamentary security in order to work out whether or not parliamentarians are up to standard. That could also be recommended. But finally, really, those responsible should be sanctioned. In the United Kingdom and the United States, APT 31, who confirmed to have imposed this attack, were sanctioned. Well, 18 Canadians were sanctioned, were attacked as well. So surely a similar remedy ought to be appropriate for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madame Gaudreau, 2 minutes 30 secondes.
C'est difficile, Monsieur le Président. Ben, c'est pas compliqué.
Well, I found a solution. It's not too hard. A good solution. I would invite you to answer my questions if you can. What are the consequences? We didn't talk about, national economy here or anything like that. But are there models that we can get, are used elsewhere in the world, other countries? And consequences. But I had some time to review this, and I'd like to know, Mr. Chung, I have 16 characters in my password. Is that sufficient? Well, you were telling us yours was almost unbreakable. But anyway, when the CSE came to meet us, or will come to meet us, you seem to be very well informed on this file. I'm really a novice in all this. On the 15th of December, 21, in France, There was something very similar to APT 31. I have the summary here, and I can find ways. And this is a public document, which tells us we have a lot of work to do. So why are we hiding? Why are we not sharing this information? Well, that's a $65 million question. Why not hide when we have a problem? But how about we share when we have a success? But this culture of silence is working against us. Really. Is this part of a conventional tradition or usage that we've inherited from a Westminster bloc or something? No. We have to get over that. We have to change. We have to change. Thank you, Madame Gaudreau.
For 2.5 minutes, the floor is yours.
Love it when I get the end bit. I just wanted to actually go over, Mr. Junot-Katsuya. You had said, I think, in your opening remarks, unless I missed it, and so I'd love clarification, the cyber offensive powers, and then you listed several countries. Can you just repeat that for us again here?
Yeah, China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel. We could go on. CSIS in 2015 testified, the director, Mr. Michel, I forgot. Anyway, Coulomb testified in front of a Senate committee and referred to that there were 115 countries that were practicing cyber offenses, cyber attack. 115 countries back in 2015. That was according to the estimation of CSIS. So it's more than half of the country. And it's very easy to be very offensive. Take a nerd that is good with computer, give him 2 Red Bull and a computer, and he's good. That's it. That's all. He's gone, and he's capable to do a lot of damages. What we need to understand, and the question of Madame Gaudreau is so important, is the consequences, because we don't talk enough about the consequences. Now, the consequences is only to raise awareness and the level of urgency to start working on it. We're not being able necessarily to curb the consequences right away, but we need to be capable to raise awareness, to pay much more attention to what's going on, and to realize that it's going to be worse before it gets better.
So, I mean, in the list, 115. Obviously, there's the countries that we're not on good terms with. There's countries that we are. Are we doing enough? Is Canada doing enough with the countries that we're supposed to be allies with on those fronts to make a dent?
Has disappeared with the end of the Cold War. We've moved from a military confrontation to an economic confrontation when the Soviet bloc disappeared. And now it's everybody for themselves. So now what we're talking about is the national security goes through solid economic viability for your countries. So everybody competes for the same market share, for the same contracts, for the same sort of competition economically. And that economic war has transferred itself into the cyber.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matheson. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, witnesses,